We are expecting Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell momentarily to unveil the Republican version of this stimulus package and then begin negotiations with Democrats after that. Here's what we know so far is expected to be in this. The Treasury Secretary said it will include payments of $1,000 to every adult and $500 for every child. Lawmakers, I'm told, are discussing a qualifying income threshold for this. There will also be a program to keep small businesses making payroll and loans to what McConnell calls nationally important industries, but they will not, he assures, be bailouts.
We're not talking about so-called bailouts for firms that made reckless decisions. Nobody is alleging a moral hazard here. None of these firms, not corner stores, not pizza parlors, not airlines, brought this on themselves.
Now, one company that lawmakers suggest privately has been reckless is Boeing. After a year under fire for safety and technology lapses, restaurants, hotels, and other Main Street businesses have been sidelined by an act of God. This is the view on Capitol Hill, while Boeing is embroiled in a crisis of its own making. On Capitol Hill and at the White House, a potential rescue of Boeing is being compared to AIG, the insurer who used cash from customer policies to load up on toxic debt and then needed a lifeline from the government, which the government gave it in exchange for an 80% equity stake and replacing the entire management team at the company. Now, President Trump earlier today, Brian, said that he would support tying strings to some of these packages to make sure that the government got these deals on their own terms. The question now is, in order to rescue Boeing, what terms is the U.S. government going to demand?
Maybe taking the stake, as you've talked about, Kayla. Thank you very much. Kayla Tausche in D.C. Tim, I'll go to you on that. Do you believe that A, Boeing deserves some kind of aid package, and B, if it does, should the U.S. government become a stakeholder, basically a seat at the board table?
Look, if you believe that the U.S. airlines, this was not what they're doing, it's not what Boeing's doing. Boeing, as a stock, was trading at $340 in the midst of this crisis that was self-made. And if the market's a weighing machine or a voting machine, it's definitely a voting machine. Ultimately, it's a weighing machine. But Boeing wasn't seemingly going out of business during what's still a very difficult 737 MAX story for the company. So, look, Boeing's problems right now are leverage that is coming from not selling any planes to companies, to airlines who are grounding fleets and who are no longer collecting revenue. Boeing has an enormous defense business, which is more important than its commercial aircraft business. And I think absolutely Boeing is not only going to be saved, but I don't think Boeing, in the context of not blaming the pizza parlor and not blaming the corner deli, Boeing shouldn't be blamed for what's going on with airlines who are their customers in terms of buying planes in a traditional format. We know that they have a lot of work to do with the FAA. We know that even in a best case market scenario, they were hoping to get back in the air in, call it late second quarter, early third quarter. But they had gone in the other direction in terms of talking about that timeline. And again, I think they got religion as it relates to trying to get ahead of the FAA. So to me, when I think about Boeing in the context of all of this, they are a domino that's fallen both on sentiment and really as a function of what's going on in the travel world.
$398 stock last April, $98 stock today. I want to get to Dan in a second. We've got actually breaking news on Boeing. For that, of course, let's go to Phil LeBeau in Chicago. Phil.
Brian, Boeing has just announced that Nikki Haley has resigned effective immediately from the Boeing board of directors. And essentially it comes down to this. She says that she is opposed to a government bailout, which is what Boeing is pursuing in Washington, a $60 billion bailout that would not only be for Boeing, but they also say for the aviation industry overall. So again, Nikki Haley, who's only been on the Boeing board of directors, if I'm not mistaken, a little over a year and a half, maybe 2 years, is resigning from the Boeing board of directors effective immediately. And basically she says, I am opposed to government bailouts. And if we're going to go down that road, I do not want to be a part of the Boeing team. Brian, back to you.
There you go. Nikki Haley is out. Dan Nathan, you see any value in Boeing?
Of course. I mean, here's the value in Boeing, the tens of thousands of employees, the hundreds of thousands of people in the supply chain, the fact that it's one of the U.S.'s largest exporters around the world here. There's value in the airline industry, in the cruise industry, in the auto industry. All of these businesses will need to be bailed out because it's our way of life. And the fact that they've been bailed out before, and as Scott Miner called it, political poison some 10, 11, 12 years ago, it really doesn't matter here because we are at in battle for our financial lives right here. All these companies need to be saved, and I think it's really important if you're looking at Boeing that 2 months ago was at $340 and now it's at $95 to understand one thing. No matter who bails them out, whether it's Warren Buffett or the government, that there's going to be equity dilution and that $95 will be less when that bailout happens here. That's why these stocks are not rallying right now on supposed good news. All you have to do is go back to 2008 and look at how the bank stocks acted when there were rumors about who's going to get bailed out and why and what the political ramifications were. It didn't really matter. They needed the backstops, but the equities went much lower after the backstop happens. And I think that you should be prepared for that.
Yeah. Well, by the way, one political force out, Nikki Haley, but let's not forget Caroline Kennedy is still a member of the Boeing board. Obviously, somebody with deep ties there. Let's talk about it. I mean, Tim, at some point, these companies, they're trying to hang on to their dividends. I get that in a sense, but should all these companies that are talking about a bailout or whose stocks are already down 70%, do they let the dividends go or do they hang on because they feel the equity would just collapse even further?
Look, I mean, I think we've seen this with GE and other companies over the years that were dividend payers almost to their own detriment. And it almost seemed as if that was really what it was all about. Of course, you cut the dividend. But just really quickly, I mean, look at Airbus's chart. OK, they didn't have any plane mishaps. Airbus's chart has done the exact same thing. So I just encourage people. I'm not in favor of bailouts universally. In fact, I used to walk around with a T-shirt that said, "Where's my bailout?" after the 2008 crisis. But I do think if we're calling this kind of that moment where you have a unique force majeure situation as related to this virus, Anyway, back to where we are with companies paying dividends, like and share buybacks. It's very clear, as I said earlier, where a lot of the EPS and the S&P was coming from. I think ultimately engineering earnings is something that gets the C-suite paid, which often is through stock. And that's something that I think we have to be very wary of. That corporate tax cut was something that largely went in terms of buybacks and dividends. And I think it's something that absolutely let's pay attention to that. And I think there should be strings attached to bailouts that go to industries.
Guy, what are you looking for tomorrow?
Well, I tell you, I mean, the Boeing conversation is fascinating, and I'm with Dan and Tim. It's probably the single most important company in the United States. And I'm not a CFO and I'm not a politician, but in one way, shape, or form, Boeing can't go away, number one. Number two, out of many fascinating things today, and Dan Nathan flagged this in our call earlier, but I was watching it as well. People saying, what's wrong with gold? Well, the GLD was down 2% today. I get it. But look at the GDX. The gold miners were up 8%. I have not seen a divergence like that in those two things maybe ever. Now, I'm saying ever, but I'm sure there's going to be somebody that's going to at me. But that's fascinating. And I think that speaks to a couple of things. But don't discount gold right now just because the GLD was down. So that's what I'm watching, Brian.
All right, Dan, one final comment to you.
Yeah, so into the close. Wasn't a great close. It was still green. Maybe expect some weakness on the morning, after the opening or something like that. But if we can kind of do again what we did today is come up from the lows, kind of hang in there, close green, have yields not go too much lower or too much higher, then we can maybe set the foundation for what could be a nice little rally for a couple of weeks and have a little bit of a cool-off period. That's what we need right now.